Whenever I divide things into 4, I like to divide in the middle first and then divide each half into half so that you get perfectly even squares like this one. Hey everyone, I'm Kenji López-Alt. I'm a contributor for New York Times Cooking, and I'm a cookbook author, and today we're gonna make some flaky folded biscuits. There are a lot of different types of biscuits. You know, if you go to the South, a lot of the biscuits you're gonna find are made with a really soft flour, and they're almost sort of like really pillowy rolls. This style of biscuit is more the type of biscuit that I grew up eating, which is a slightly firmer, flaky folded biscuit. So my goal was to really sort of maximize the flakiness. So it'll break apart into sort of flaky layers that you can then spread with butter or jam, or you can use them as a sandwich base because they split apart really nicely. So they're gonna be crispy and buttery on the outside, soft and tender on the inside, with lots of these sort of flaky layers that we're gonna build into it by treating the dough in a kind of special way. One of the keys to biscuits is that you have to keep everything really cold. So we're gonna start with milk and yogurt straight out of the fridge. I tried making this recipe with buttermilk instead of this milk and yogurt mixture, which you can absolutely do, but what I find is that when you mix milk and yogurt like this, you end up with a slightly sort of tangier flavor than just straight up buttermilk. So I prefer the flavor of milk and yogurt combined as opposed to buttermilk. It's also more convenient because I always have milk and yogurt at home, but I rarely have buttermilk at home. We're gonna whisk this until it's smooth, and then it's going to go right back into the fridge until we're ready for it. Now we're gonna combine our dry ingredients. So we've got all-purpose flour, baking soda, and we've got baking powder, and salt. And we'll just whisk those up until they're nice and combined. If you've ever made biscuits before, you might have seen directions to take butter, put it into your dry ingredients, and then mix it together with your fingertips or maybe with a pastry cutter until you have sort of pea-sized pieces of butter. What you want is the butter to remain sort of in distinct small pieces that are coated in the flour, and that way, as the biscuit bakes, it prevents gluten from forming in between those layers of butter and flour. The water content in the butter will also steam, which is what kind of makes the biscuit separate and rise. Rather than trying to pinch the butter into the flour, instead we start with frozen butter, and then we grate it on the large holes of a box grater. And that's gonna give you these nice little shreds of butter that stay distinct. The recipe only calls for 1 stick of butter, but we're gonna start with 2 sticks of frozen butter because if you try and grate an entire stick of frozen butter, you end up grating your hands instead. So instead I do 2 half sticks. By the way, if you've got a food processor with a grating disc, this is a great time to pull it out and use it. You do want to be real careful at this stage because you don't want to grate your hand, but you kind of got to risk it to biscuit. I know that the New York Times editorial board does not like puns, but I don't know how the video team feels.
I'm very pro pun.
Okay. So we got exactly 5 ounces of butter here. I'm gonna take the rest of one of these sticks, which is about 3 tablespoons, and pop it into a pan. Just before they go in the oven, we're gonna brush them with that melted butter. We're gonna put that frozen butter straight into the flour. If at any point the butter feels like it's starting to sort of melt or turn greasy, you wanna take this and just pop it into the freezer for a few minutes just to make sure that the butter stays nice and firm. It's really important that the butter stays solid right until the point that you bake it. Because if the butter starts to melt, that's when it starts to sort of combine with the flour and you end up with those kind of grainy, mealy biscuits as opposed to nice flaky ones. So toss really gently with your fingertips until it's all incorporated. Dump our dry into our wet and then fold it together. When I'm folding this, I'm trying to kind of get underneath and scoop it. I'm not gonna try and mush it down or really knead it too hard. So the more you knead a mixture like this, the more gluten forms. And gluten is the protein network that gives bread its structure. So something like a baguette or like a sourdough loaf is gonna have really good gluten formation and it's gonna be nice and chewy. A biscuit, we want it to stay nice and tender, so we're gonna be very careful not to overmix it. All right, so we wanna do this until the dough just kind of barely comes together, folding as opposed to kneading. You can flour the countertop pretty heavily here. This is gonna be a pretty wet dough, but it doesn't really suffer from being over-floured. The flour actually ends up kind of working into between those layers and helping it stay separated. So at this stage, we're just gonna knead it about 3 to 4 times, just to give it a tiny bit of structure. And we're gonna roll this out into a square. And so you can see here, when we're rolling it out, you can see all the sort of little discrete chunks of butter. That's really exactly what we're looking for here. And at this stage, we're going to start building in our layers. Using a scraper, we're going to fold one side over like that. We're going to fold the other side over, get it into a sort of nice rectangle here. And same thing, we're going to fold the bottom up, and we're going to fold the top up. And then once again, we're going to roll it out. So at this stage, you have 9 layers of dough. So 3 times 3, yeah, 9 layers of dough. We're going to re-roll it into a square. And again, you know, if at any stage it feels like it's starting to get warm or you see the butter starting to soften, you can pick up this whole thing, pop it on a sheet tray and stick it in your freezer for a few minutes just to make sure that it doesn't melt. All right, so we want this to be about 12 by 12 at the end. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna roll it up like a jelly roll. So this is a technique that if you've ever made like scallion pancakes, this is how you get layers in a scallion pancake. You roll it up into a sort of jelly roll like this and flatten it out. So I kind of stole that technique to use for these biscuits. Also, if you want to have any inclusions, like say you wanted to make these blueberry flavored or you wanted to make them like cheese and thyme flavored, you can sprinkle that over the surface here and kind of roll it up inside, and those will get incorporated into the biscuits as they bake. All right, so we're going to lay it seam side down and then one more time kind of flatten it out. And we're looking for a roughly sort of 3-inch by 12-inch tight log here. All right, so once we're here, I'm going to divide it into 4. And then each one of these we're going to cut into 2 triangles. So, parchment lined baking sheet. We're going to space our biscuits out. If you like these sweet, by the way, you can add a few tablespoons of sugar to the dry mixture, and then after brushing them with butter like this, you can sprinkle them with something like a coarse sugar, like like Muscovado or Demerara sugar, sugar in the raw, and it'll give them a sort of nice, crunchy, sugary top. I'm gonna go straight into a 425-degree oven. Depending on your oven, it'll take between 16 and 20 minutes or so. All right, so we're looking for this nice golden brown, crispy top. We're gonna give them one final brush of melted butter, just to give them a little sheen. These biscuits, by the way, you can form them the night before, the day before, get them on your sheet tray, cover them up and put them in your fridge, and then just bake them off in the morning. So if you want fresh hot biscuits in the morning without putting all the work in, you can absolutely start them the night before. They're gonna be hot, but you can see when you pull them apart, they kind of really nicely separate into layers like that. You can get some more butter in them. We'll jam some jelly into them. Close them up, and there you go. Oh, they are flaky and buttery and tender. Really crispy on the outside. They're great with butter and jam. They're also great, if you put some scrambled eggs, put some bacon in there, they make really great sandwiches. They're sturdier than a lot of other types of biscuits, but they're really about that sort of nice contrast between the flaky layers and the crisp outer crust and the sort of moist, extra buttery interior. These are my folded flaky biscuits. If you want this exact recipe or any of my other recipes or any of the recipes from the other great contributors at the New York Times, you can find them at nytcooking.com.